Marco from the Animorphs once said, "Most things in life can be seen as either tragic or comic, and it's your choice. If you step back far enough from the details, everything gets funny. But humor kind of breaks down when the tragedy is up close and personal." Anyway, I want to talk about why Todd Phillips' Joker is a bad movie and an irresponsible depiction of mental illness. By the way, content warning for discussions of mental illness, physical and psychological abuse, suicide, and also I'm going to spoil the heck out of Joker. I'll be honest, I didn't want to talk about this movie. As a rule, I prefer to ignore movies I think are bad, especially when other people are clearly getting something out of it. Talk about the things you like, ignore the things you don't. And, well, I don't like this movie. So I thought that I would at least leave well enough alone. But then it got nominated for 11 Academy Awards, more than Mad Max Fury Road, Inception, and actually A Beautiful Mind, which is a much better movie about the struggles of living with a mental illness. It only got 8. Also, I am a literal card-carrying member of the Writers Guild of America East, and in a bid for my vote in the Writers Guild Awards, they sent me the screenplay. For your consideration. So let's consider it. Part 1. For your consideration. By the way, I wrote this script before the Writers Guild Awards, but I'm recording on February 2nd, which means the winners were just announced last night. Now, first, I want to point out that Todd Phillips has said that part of the reason he made a serious movie like Joker is because he doesn't feel like he can do comedy anymore these days. People are too easily offended, and so funny people don't want to make comedies. He said in an interview with Vanity Fair, "Go try to be funny nowadays with this woke culture." There were articles written about why comedies don't work anymore. I'll tell you why. Because all the fucking funny guys are like, "Fuck this shit," because I don't want to offend you. Anyway, Joker was nominated for Best Adapted Screenplay in the Writers Guild Awards. And it lost to Jojo Rabbit, the comedy movie wherein Taika Waititi plays a 10-year-old German boy's imaginary friend, Hitler.
They call me a scared rabbit.
Let them say whatever they want. People used to say a lot of nasty things about me. "Oh, this guy's a lunatic. Oh, look at that psycho. He's gonna get us all killed."
I voted for that one. Okay, but now that the illusion of linear time has been shattered, what should I be considering? Well, according to this tweet from Variety, I could consider The Compassion of Joker. The film's power springs from its cry for empathy and kindness for the downtrodden. That plea is reflected in crafts, design, Todd Phillips' writing and direction, and Joaquin Phoenix's acclaimed performance. Hashtag sponsored. That's right, this tweet and the one of 6 different features financed by Warner Brothers and hosted on Variety's site are part of the studio's campaign to convince awards voters to give its film some shiny trophies. Now, awards campaigns are a common practice in the industry, but it's nice to see Warner Brothers using theirs for this supervillain origin story to say that people should be nicer to each other. It's like that old Mr. Rogers quote. "When I was a boy and I would see scary things on the news, my mother would tell me, 'Look for the people who are paid to say that other people said that someone should be helping. You will always be able to find someone who wants to win awards for saying they should be helping.'" If you click the link in this tweet, you'll be taken to a piece entitled The Power of Empathy. It extols how this supervillain's origin story is actually about being empathetic towards your fellow man. It summarizes itself in the final paragraph by saying, Gandhi once said... Like it's an 8th grade book report! I'm sorry. Gandhi once said, "The true measure of any society can be found in how it treats its most vulnerable members. The filmmakers of Joker have created a piece of art that is startling in both its cinematic elan..." God. It's fine. Stop. It's fine. The filmmakers of Joker have created a piece of art that is startling in both its cinematic elan and its compassionate portrait of society's lost souls. The ones we see around us, traumatized and dispossessed. Okay, I do actually want to consider that, because I think that it's important that we examine the impact that the media we consume has on the most vulnerable segments of our society. Now, the SpawnCon doesn't explicitly mention mental illness, but it is a very obvious theme of the movie, and it's one I'm going to largely focus on. Now, I want to be as fair as I can to this movie, which, for reasons I'll explain towards the end of the video, I can't be. I simply can't be fair or unbiased or anything towards this movie. But I will try, and in that vein, I will point out that there are quite a few themes in this movie, but mental illness is a big one, and it's the crucial lens I'm going to be using to look at this movie. With all that in mind, Part 2, a movie about everything. The movie talks about a lot of things, but it's clear from the beginning that Arthur's mental illness is at the forefront of the story of who he is. During one of the early scenes, after getting beaten up for the crime of being in the vicinity of teenagers, Arthur goes to visit his social worker. His social worker, who is very, very bad at her job, thumbs through a journal Arthur is visibly upset to share, pays little attention to the details of Arthur's life, and when he asks for an increase in his medication, utters this malpractice of a line.
Arthur, you're on 7 different medications. Surely they must be doing something.
Getting the right combination and dosage and frequency of medications can be difficult even under the most normal of circumstances. If he's on 7 different medications and in the 80s, that's like strapping 7 different gas canisters to the back of a scuba diver and going, one of those must be breathable gases. From here on, we see a grueling montage of how living with a mental illness and just general bad luck can make your life miserable. Arthur has to use pre-printed cards to explain the condition that causes him to laugh uncontrollably. His boss lectures him for, among other things, being weird and making his coworkers feel uncomfortable. He has difficulty connecting with a woman in his building that he's attracted to, and when at a comedy club, he has to take notes so he can later understand what people find funny, suggesting that he lacks an intuitive understanding of social interaction. Which, relatable. Now, the movie goes out of its way to never give Arthur a diagnosable mental illness, instead pulling symptoms from across the mental health spectrum. These include physical tics, emotional dysregulation, social awkwardness, disordered thinking, and while the movie never confirms that he's hallucinating the romantic relationship he has with his building mate, as opposed to merely daydreaming about her, the option is clearly left on the table. The result is a character who isn't just mentally ill, but visibly so. And I want to state explicitly what the movie does not. If you encounter someone like this in your own life, they are not dangerous. Just because someone exhibits visible symptoms of a mental illness does not automatically mean they are dangerous. A fact this movie will go to great lengths to pretend it's not undermining. The first act of the film culminates after Arthur is fired for bringing the gun a colleague gave him into a children's hospital, which, I don't know, man. If you wanted me to sympathize with Arthur for losing his job, I think I'm on the clown boss's side on this one. Anyway, on his train ride home, Arthur gets accosted by 3 Wall Street douche bros who, after they've completed their no doubt daily ritual of harassing a woman on the train, ridicule and then assault Arthur for his laughter tic. They mockingly sing "Send in the Clowns," they take his stuff, and they eventually knock him to the floor of the train where they kick him repeatedly. In retaliation, Arthur pulls his gun and shoots 2 of the men before chasing down and executing the 3rd. Now, I want to say, up to this point, I don't actually hate this movie. There are a lot of really realistic depictions of what it's like to struggle with mental illness, and this, Arthur's first act of violence, isn't connected to his mental illness in any way. If anything, it seems like Arthur's reached a "we're not gonna take it anymore" kind of moment after getting fired, which is not something that's exclusive to people with mental illnesses. He also possessed a gun during a physical altercation, which tends to increase the likelihood that someone's going to get shot in the body with bullets. It's how guns work. It's a depressing story so far, but that doesn't make it a bad one. Then things get weird. The next hour of this movie is a cluttered mess of half-hearted explanations for how Arthur could do something that he just already did. First, Arthur almost immediately learns that the social service program through which he gets his medication has had its funding cut. While telling Arthur that he can't come back here anymore, his social worker says,
They don't give a shit about people like you, Arthur. And they really don't give a shit about people like me either.
Cool, totally awesome thing to say to someone who's about to go off their medication and lose their support system. Arthur's killings also set off a wave of anti-rich protests, which, can I say, are handled with the comically naive nuance of Bill and Ted. They're generic protests of people in clown masks whose main message seems to be that they hate Thomas Wayne, news reports about vague unrests, and I'm sorry, this shot. Kill the rich, a new movement? Nah, man, that's never happened before. But the best bit is during a TV interview where a reporter says,
"It's almost as if our less fortunate residents are taking the side of the killer."
Yeah, that would be weird, wouldn't it? What are you going for here, Todd? I don't understand. Anyway, Thomas Wayne replies,
"What kind of coward would do something that cold-blooded? Someone who hides behind a mask. Someone who is envious of those more fortunate than themselves."
And like Ozzy Osbourne, that's repeatedly accused of corruption of the young.
There's also a subplot about whether or not Arthur is Thomas Wayne's son. His mother believes that she had an affair with Thomas Wayne and gave birth to his child. But medical records that Arthur stole from a hospital indicated that his mother actually suffered from delusions, adopted Arthur, and even allowed her boyfriends to beat him. It's also left just barely implied that this may have caused some of Arthur's neurological conditions. So Arthur, like us, spends a great deal of time trying to figure out whether or not he's Thomas Wayne's son, only to, like us, be disappointed when that subplot goes nowhere. However, it seems like this subplot exists to give Arthur a reason to come into contact with the Wayne family, so we can get this scene where Arthur meets a young Bruce Wayne, performs a magic trick, and then...
That's better.
Yeah. So, in the screenplay, at the part where Arthur sticks his fingers in a 10-year-old boy's mouth, the scene description reads, "The boy is okay with it." Todd? Dude. What is wrong with you? Next up, we've got the subplot of Arthur's imagined relationship with Sophie. Many of the scenes of the two of them together are just basically background radiation to the other subplots. Half the time she's just in a shot so that later on the movie can reveal she wasn't really there. In their last scene together, Arthur breaks into her apartment and, barely recognizing him, she rightfully asks him to leave, implying that the relationship you have seen so far isn't really real. The movie leaves it ambiguous as to whether or not, at the end of this scene, he kills her. Now, the screenplay actually has extra scenes where she witnesses the climax of the movie happening on live TV, confirming that he never actually killed her. Now, this obviously isn't canon, but I think it demonstrates that this movie has a preference for leaving things unanswered or ambiguous as opposed to providing concrete answers for things. There's also a somehow very minor subplot where detectives are trying to track down the person who killed the 3 Wall Street guys, which leads them to Arthur's old clown agency. One of Arthur's co-workers, Randall, is the one we see give him the gun, although Randall disputes that to the police, saying Arthur instead tried to buy a gun from him. Now, this once again leaves it ambiguous as to whether Randall's just covering his own ass or whether or not Arthur's an unreliable narrator. Finally, there's a subplot that's basically about public shaming. Arthur tries his hand at doing stand-up comedy at the local comedy club, only to be interrupted by an uncontrollable laughter fit that disrupts his act. Now, this is genuinely devastating to watch, as it should be painfully obvious, even to the characters in the audience, that this is an involuntary reaction and is actually very painful for him. So, it's a little bit over the top when Arthur's favorite TV show, Live with Murray Franklin, gets a tape of his act just to make fun of it on TV. Also, somehow in Let's Call It 1981, a local comedy club in Gotham has a multi-cam setup to record open mic night acts and distributes the tape to the local talk show circuit. Whatever, man. Plot's got a plot. Now, if all of that seems like a lot, it's because it is. We've basically seen every single possible explanation for why someone like Arthur could become disaffected. He was fired from his job. He was mocked on TV for pursuing his dreams. He's got a mental illness. He was physically abused. He was adopted and his mother lied about it. His social services have been cut. He can't get a date with a woman and imagined an entire relationship with her. Also, the rich? This is why, on some level, I understand if this movie resonated with you. It covers so many topics, and the scenes you get of those are relatively realistic, but it also takes a buckshot approach to tackling every issue all at once. It hits on a lot of things, but very few of them are given screen time to develop. Arthur's unhealthy relationship with sex and women, his abuse as a child, being forced to take care of his mother, all of these are little more than set dressing. We never get a chance to see how they affect him as a person other than they make him feel bad, and half the threads taper out before the end of the movie. As an example, shortly after learning that he was physically abused as a child, Arthur goes to the hospital to visit his mother, who has had a stroke. Now, here, the movie differs from the screenplay in what I think is a bafflingly backwards removal of nuance. In the screenplay, Arthur says, "You remember how you used to tell me that God gave me this laugh for a reason? That I had a purpose? Laughter and joy, that whole thing? It wasn't God. It was you, or one of your boyfriends." But in the movie, the line we get is,
"You used to tell me that my laugh was a condition, that there was something wrong with me. There isn't. That's the real me."
This might be the worst change from the screenplay to the film that I found. You see, while Arthur's uncontrollable laughter could be attributed to any number of conditions, one possible explanation is a condition known as pseudobulbar affect. This condition can present in people with neurological conditions like Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, people who have had a stroke, or people who have suffered a traumatic brain injury, such as being hit in the head as a child. Now, this could have been a powerful moment where Arthur correctly identifies that parental abuse and neglect can leave long-term consequences that aren't immediately visible. Instead, we get a villain suggesting that the mental illness he struggles with is just how I am, and I guess this is as good a time as any to get into why this movie's framing is a problem. Part 3. This is a villain's story. By the third act of the film, most of the movie's subplots have either been resolved, abandoned, or just kind of peter out for the remainder of the film. 3 main ones remain, and each of them are tied to the initial conflict of Arthur's mental illness. First, Arthur's aforementioned visit to the hospital, where he explains to his mother that he doesn't actually have a mental illness, and that's the real me, which time out for just a second. If you've never struggled with a mental illness, let me tell you now, identity issues are a huge problem. The issue of who you really are, of whether the real you is the one that's on meds versus off of it, it can be devastating to your self-esteem. But this line, that's the real me, it can be something of a problem. Especially when it's followed up by Arthur killing his mother literally 60 seconds later. Shortly after Arthur's 4th murder, he's practicing for his appearance on Murray's TV show. Murray has invited him to come on to talk about his comedy act, and Arthur is planning to kill himself on TV. But as he's getting ready, he gets a visit from his old co-workers, Gary and Randall, the latter of whom wants to get his story straight for the cops. They offer to help cheer Arthur up after the death of his mother, to which Arthur replies,
"I feel good. I stopped taking my medication. I feel a lot better now."
This is a bad movie. This is a bad line, and it makes it a bad movie. This is the part where the movie loses me entirely, because there is no good interpretation of this scene. No possible interpretation that doesn't draw a direct line between Arthur's mental illness and the violent acts he commits. If you take a surface level interpretation, "I'm off my meds, I feel a lot better," sounds like it's advocating for people with mental illnesses going off their prescribed medication, which is dangerous. But we're reasonable people, and I think most people know that. I don't think any reasonable person is saying that you should take a line delivered by a villain out of context and use it to endorse any kind of real-life behavior or philosophy. I'm just gonna set this over here for just a bit. In any case, it's clear that Arthur's not okay, because less than 60 seconds after saying, "I'm off my meds, I feel a lot better," Arthur stabs Randall in the neck. This is the second time in 6 minutes of film that the movie has invoked Arthur's mental illness and then shown him killing someone. So after his 5th murder, Arthur heads down to the TV studio for his interview with Murray Franklin. Murray expects to talk to Arthur about his act, so he asks Arthur to tell a joke, and he tells, an actually kind of funny dark humor joke. Like it's obviously offensive and dark, but it's structured well. It's a good joke, like mechanically speaking. But then this pearl clutching old lady tells him,
Oh, no, you cannot joke about that.
Yeah, that's not funny.
Sheesh, that was intense.
What am I going to do?
No idea.
Got it! I will
Burn down
negotiate.
the house and blame Winston Churchill. Or negotiate.
So after this, Arthur confesses to killing the 3 Wall Street guys on live TV. Now, this is the part where the movie delivers what must be its thesis statement, the summary, the point of everything we've seen so far, what the movie wants to... Yeah, hang on. And we hear, I guess, what it is the movie has to say.
Have you seen what it's like out there, Murray? Do you ever actually leave the studio? Everybody just yells and screams at each other. Nobody's civil anymore. Nobody thinks what it's like to be the other guy. You think men like Thomas Wayne ever think what it's like to be someone like me? To be somebody but themselves? They don't. They think that we'll just sit there and take it like good little boys, that we won't werewolf and go wild.
Okay, I'm gonna set aside that being civil and thinking what it's like to be the other guy wouldn't magically, for example, fund Arthur's social service programs or fix the wealth inequality gap. And I'm going to set those aside because, well, you can come back now. I don't think any reasonable person is saying that you should take a line delivered by a villain out of context and use it to endorse any kind of real-life behavior or philosophy. And yet, the filmmakers of Joker have created a piece of art that is startling in its compassionate portrait of society's lost souls, the ones we see around us, traumatized and dispossessed. So, in its climactic moment, how does this movie choose to portray the lost souls all around us, traumatized and dispossessed?
What do you get?
I don't think so.
When you cross
I think
a
we're
mentally
done
ill
with you,
loner
George. That's
with a
it.
society that abandons him and treats him like trash.
Call the police,
I'll
Gene.
tell you what you get.
Call the police.
You get what you f***ing deserve.
And that's the 3rd time this movie has invoked Arthur's mental illness and then immediately shown him killing someone. Part 4. Why I can't be fair. I promised I was going to explain why I can't be completely fair to this movie, and it's simply because I've lived too much of it. I've lived with some form of mental illness basically my whole life. I don't want to give a specific diagnosis, mainly because the last time I got like an official one from a psychiatrist, it was an entire DSM ago. But my current therapist says that at least some of my symptoms are very similar to complex PTSD, which is it's a form of PTSD that you can get from prolonged and repeated exposure to a traumatic event, just as opposed to one big event or a couple big events. Among the specific issues I've struggled with in my own life that are, in fairness, somewhat accurately depicted in the film are being involuntarily hospitalized, being on an excessive number of medications. I was physically assaulted multiple times as a young child. I have physical tics that I can't entirely control. While mine isn't one specific one like Arthur's is, they kind of change over time. Sometimes it's a tensing of this neck muscle back here, sometimes it's excessive blinking, and they can change like over months or years, and many of them hurt quite a bit. And sometimes I do actually have an involuntary laughing tic. Not quite as exaggerated as Arthur's, but for example, like a noise that should be a huh turns into a or maybe just a regular laugh that goes on a bit too long. And it hurts. Like the scene of Arthur in tears from his laughter because it hurts him so much to be laughing. Like, I've been there, literally that exact action where I'm laughing and it hurts and I'm crying and like it sucks, and that's pretty realistic. But The worst is the trauma I suffered when I was in middle and high school. I went to some special education schools that had special rooms called seclusion rooms. These were basically small concrete rooms sealed from the outside where they would put students who were being a problem in some way or another. Students can, and I often was, left for hours in these rooms sometimes. Now, this one actually isn't depicted in Joker, but the most realistic depiction I've seen is actually in Stranger Things, Season 1, Episode 2. Like, this has actually happened to me. Like, this exact series of actions. Associate Professor of Psychiatry at Harvard Medical School, J. Wesley Boyd, wrote for Psychology Today that solitary confinement, at least in the context as it's used for prisoners, is tantamount to torture. The UN agreed and condemned its use, except in the rarest of circumstances, and in fact outright banned its use for people with mental illnesses or juveniles. In a 2019 NPR interview with Chicago Tribune reporter Jennifer Smith Richards, the reporter describes the result of an investigation into this practice in Illinois schools, sharing how students often screamed, cried, or even physically harmed themselves in an attempt to get out. The report also explored the lasting trauma that continued into adulthood from this practice. The use of seclusion rooms was banned in my state in 2010, 6 years after a boy hung himself in one of those rooms. Now, I'm bringing this up because this practice had a philosophy behind it, which, by my reading at least, this movie seems to share, which is that mentally ill people can be dangerous and violent, and you need to be protected from them. In a behind-the-scenes feature, producer Bradley Cooper explained what excited him about diving into what could make a character like Joker become the way he is.
To take probably the most famous two-dimensional villain who we've watched just wreak havoc in so many forms, whether it's the comic book, a television series, or various films, to say, okay, what happens if we humanize this person? And let's see what could be the possible causes. What could be the possible causes? What could be the possible causes?
It is a problem that mental illness isn't just one of the causes they came up with. It's like the main one. Now, because I'm a little close to the situation, I decided to reach out to Dr. Jennifer Sarrett of Emory's Center for the Study of Human Health. She researches and teaches about, among other things, representation of autism and other mental illnesses in the media. On the issue of depicting mentally ill people as violent, she told me,
what we know from research is that people with mental illnesses are much more likely to be the victims and the perpetrators of violence. And when they are violent, it's most often mediated by something like substance abuse, which is often the result of not being able to get good treatment.
In fact, the climactic scene of this movie has a parallel to real life, but with one very key difference. Christine Chubbuck was a local news reporter in Sarasota. Reports from around the time said that she loved her job, but that she was depressed, she struggled in her social life, and she was never really able to form any long-term romantic bonds with anyone. And on a live TV news broadcast in 1974, she shot herself. She was rushed to a nearby hospital where she died hours later. It was the first time anyone had ever killed themselves on live TV. When it comes to someone with a mental illness causing harm, this is much more often what happens in real life. If someone with a mental illness is going to harm someone, they're probably going to choose themselves. Also, as a minor point, given that this event took place in the 70s and Joker takes place in, let's call it 1981, you'd think Murray's studio would have a bit better security. But we're picking nits now. Okay, I hear you say, but if someone is going to commit a horrific act of violence, whether they become a mass murderer or a comic book supervillain, there must be something wrong with them, right?
Yes, something has to be wrong, and that thing that's wrong is anger, and not mental illness. You know, people act violently out of anger, and I don't see this as much different from lashing out of anger in a fight.
Now, people with a mental illness can be angry, and they can be violent. None of this is to say that no one with a mental illness has ever committed an act of violence or that it's impossible to happen. Rather, the point is that the connection between mental illness and violence is no stronger than the connection between violence and the color of your car or the food you like. But there can be consequences to depicting that connection as stronger than it is. And ironically, those consequences are exactly the same thing that this movie is trying to warn against. When I asked Dr. Sarrett how depictions in the media that correlate mental illness with violence can affect people in real life who actually have a mental illness, she had this to say.
I think it's social distance. People don't want to be physically, emotionally close to people with mental illnesses. They're not trusted or relied upon, and social support and social relationships is still integral to human flourishing.
Now, I don't think Todd Phillips or Joaquin Phoenix or anyone else on this movie set out with the intention of making a story that says, stay away from your mentally ill friends or else they might kill you. But I do think that in trying to tell a story about what causes someone to become violent, they made some of the same ignorant assumptions about mental illness that people have been making for forever. The idea that having a mental illness makes you more likely to lash out at someone or become violent is simply not true. And by the way, other Joker stories have also said this. In the August 2019 issue of Empire, Todd Phillips said, "We didn't follow anything from the comic books, which people are going to be mad about." Well, I wouldn't say I'm mad, Todd. But if you'd read The Killing Joke or even just seen The Dark Knight, you'd see that there's already plenty of stories out there where the Joker argues that Batman or Commissioner Gordon or Two-Face or the people of Gotham are just one bad day away from becoming him. They act superior, but
when the chips are down, these civilized people, they'll eat each other.
And I'll tell you, Todd, the problem with those stories isn't like the duration of the bad day. It's not like, one bad day won't cause Commissioner Gordon to become the Joker, but like if he had a lot of them, then he would. No. The point of those stories is that no matter what's happened to you, you can still choose not to be evil. These stories always contradict the Joker's viewpoint by showing people, everyone from the heroes we admire to just everyday people, choosing not to commit acts of violence, choosing not to lower their standards to the villain's level. And that actually is realistic. That's not superhero fantasy. Todd Phillips tried to turn the superhero genre on itself, but ironically, you got it wrong, Todd. The overly idealistic superhero movies are right. Todd Phillips, on the other hand, depicts Arthur as a victim of consequence. The producers have gone on at length about what causes him to be this way, but the truth is, there is no cause. There's just a choice. Arthur killed because he chose to. It wasn't forced on him by a mental illness or society or the rich or anything like that. And it's weird that this movie managed to connect his violence to mental illness 3 times, but never managed to focus on his choice. And here's the thing. If Arthur had continued to suffer, if he chose differently, if he decided to kill himself on TV instead of someone else, that would be a tragedy. But his character is wrong. It's still a tragedy the way we see it go down. It's still a tragedy that he killed people. It's still a tragedy that he caused chaos. It's still a tragedy that he enjoys it. Laughing at the evil things you do isn't what makes it a comedy. Murray even says in the scene that Arthur's speech is filled with self-pity. But Marco from the Animorphs once said, "I didn't want their pity. I still don't. I'm a joker. I'm a comedian. That's how I deal with life. See, I've always believed that to some extent you get to decide for yourself what your life will be like. Me? I choose comedy." Hey, if you made it to the end of this, thanks a lot for watching. This is my first time doing one of these video essays, and my video editing skills are a little rusty. I know that was a lot. I promise I have funnier ideas in mind. So since I have absolutely like no method of feedback for this whatsoever, I'm gonna be that guy. If you want to hear more, or if you want to see more, I guess, of these videos, if you can subscribe, that'll let me know that like there's any interest at all. I've got some stuff that I want to do on Pirates of the Caribbean, Colossal, obviously Animorphs. I can't stop talking about that. So if you like this, just click the stupid button and let me know, or just talk to me. Just say hi. Just say hi. It's cool. Hey.